Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Jimmy Young, filling in for Elena Pinto, who will be back for our next show, scheduled to be released on Monday, June 2nd. Next up, our international reports. Europe has a number of countries who are slowly reforming their long-existing prohibitions and introducing medical programs. France and Spain are making plans for a vibrant medical market, and last week, Ben Stevens outlined Denmark's plans for a medical program. In April, Slovenia introduced legislation that will regulate the cultivation, production, and trade of cannabis for medical and scientific purposes. With more from Europe, here's Ben Stevens with a story about a company that just couldn't survive.
I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, with this week's news from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. One of the UK's few remaining pharmaceutical cannabis companies, Oxford Cannabinoid Technology Holdings, appears to have entered administration. While there's not yet been an official public statement from the company, we've seen numerous documents, including a notice in the UK's public record of insolvency proceedings, confirming that administrators were appointed on May the 2nd. OCT, as it's more commonly known, has long relied on investor funding to push forward its clinical trials, a common story in early-stage biotech. But as global investment in biotech continues to tighten, it seems OCT has become the latest casualty. The company was working on a promising pipeline of cannabinoid-based drugs, including a lead treatment for neuropathic pain, which was expected to enter phase 2 clinical trials this year. It held patents across the US, China, Europe, and beyond, and had an exclusive licensing deal with Canopy Growth for a large portfolio of cannabinoid derivatives. Now, this deal and its intellectual property has now, which includes a library of 2,000 proprietary compounds, has now become one of the company's most valuable assets and potentially a major opportunity for any firm able to pick it up and carry it forward. This doesn't just reflect the struggles of drug developers, but it speaks to a wider crisis across the biotech industry globally. Regulatory uncertainty, cuts to federal health agencies, and a sharp decline in investment, particularly in the US, where OCT, alongside almost every ambitious biotech firm, saw its future, have left many small and mid-sized firms unable to stay afloat. OCT had even announced plans to leave the public markets last year, hoping that private investment would be easier to access. But a planned $10 million raise launched in March appears to have fallen short, and now its future lies in the hands of administrators. It's another major loss for the UK's already struggling medical cannabis and biotech sectors, and a reminder of how difficult it remains to turn scientific promise into commercial reality without serious, sustained backing. That's all for me from this week. I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is DEbi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. Peace.
The recent study is published in the International Journal of Drug Policy, indicating that Canada legalizing of the non-medical cannabis has significantly shifted the consumer spending from illegal to legal, which is great. Between October 2021 and September 2022, Canadians spent an estimated $6.72 billion on cannabis, $5.2 billion, which is around 78%, from legal sources, and $1.49 billion from illegal sources. The legal market estimates closely matched with the federal retail sales data, underscoring these studies' accuracy. The study emphasizes the importance of analyzing consumer behavior to understand the market trends and suggesting the provincial differences in the legal and the illicit market. This is going to be something that's going to be working way more research, but hopefully will be coming with a greater, result. Next one we have is that Ghost Shop is alleging that the Health Canada was unfair in targeting them. Bernardo, for this data, which is the CEO of Ghost Drop, has contended that Health Canada's $550,000 fine, which is now $250,000 fine, is an attempt to publicly use them as an example by asserting the company has been under the disproportionate, oh my God, I was so sorry. They've been under scrutiny since 2022. These are penalties stemming from the alleged not complying with the marketing and packaging, including their bright pink jar, and participation in promotional events like Halloween themed days. These things Health Canada are marketing to the youth, but at the same time, in my eyes, it really isn't, especially if youth aren't supposed to be there. Bernardio argues that the enforcement is inconsistent and the compliance driven, potentially influenced by competitors, and calls for more equitable regulations allowing direct consumer engagement while safeguarding the youth. And I totally agree with that. This is something that we are seeing across the board, but like I had said before, Health Canada has re-evaluated some of their marketing techniques and have been introducing the aspect of clear jars and clear packaging. So I'm hoping this is something that's going to be able to be beneficial to not only the consumers, but to the LPs and the brands such as Ghost Drops. This is DEbi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. Peace.
The state of Texas continues to serve as a battle for democracy and the future of the hemp industry in that state. Now that a court has ruled that local cities and towns cannot enact laws that contradict state laws, law enforcement officers in Austin aren't sure they want to enforce them. In 2022, voters in Austin, the state capital, approved a ballot question that decriminalized the possession of cannabis. Now the state has a court decision that says not only are those laws invalid, but now they are trying to pass a law that won't allow any ballot questions on the legality of cannabis. Austin was one of the first cities to pass a decriminalization measure, and another 6 localities followed. Now let's check in with Tina Tasaka in Nevada with her Tribal Lands Report. Tina?
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians broke ground in April 2024 on a large indoor cannabis cultivation facility, part of a broader strategy to establish a sovereign cannabis economy. While the tribe currently permits medical marijuana, officials are eyeing future recreational sales as laws shift. The facility is expected to be operational by late 2025, creating jobs and economic growth. The tribe legalized medical cannabis in 2022 and began issuing licenses in early 2025. There's a special event this week in Las Vegas, and why you should attend the MCBA Equity Workshop Tour being held Thursday, May 22nd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. You can register on eventhigh.io. This event isn't your average panel series. It's a hands-on, mission-driven experience. The Minority Cannabis Business Association is hosting a powerful workshop built around interactive roundtables to accelerate collaboration and real-world problem solving. Why bring in government officials and regulators? Because understanding the rules and influencing them is key to lasting impact. This curating forum puts you face to face with the people shaping cannabis policy. Shout out to the Chamber of Cannabis. Key speakers and leaders include Kara Cronkite, Nevada CCB, Brandon Wygand, Nevada Cannabis Association, Rihanna Durrett, UNLV Cannabis Policy Institute, Jessica Velasquez, Mike Lamudo, Naomi Granger, Kima Ogden, and more. This will be moderated by Chandler Cooks. Special thank you to all of our sponsors and partners who believed in the vision of the EWT. If you're building in cannabis and want to connect with regulators, investors, and change makers, this is the room to be in. That's it for the Nevada Highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Center for Disease Control announced this week that there were 30,000 fewer deaths in the U.S. thanks to drug overdoses. Now, this is not related to cannabis, but we have to wonder why the statistic in this. Think about this. There were 30,000 fewer deaths in 2024, and that represents the largest decline in 1 year since the CDC started tracking overdose deaths over the past 45 years. Now, up until this year, 4% year over year was the largest decline. Now, you have to wonder about the fact that Americans are consuming more cannabis now than alcohol on a daily basis. And with nearly half the states in the U.S. having adult use legal programs, maybe people are using the plant medicine instead of going on opioids for their pain and other ailments. Now let's check in what's going on in Michigan with Amie Carter.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and this is your weekly Michigan report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. There's been a lot of buzz lately, so let me roll it up for you. First up, boxing superstar Claressa Shields is back in Detroit on July 26th. She'll be taking on New Zealand's Lanny Daniels at Little Caesars Arena to defend her undisputed women's heavyweight title. After a little hiccup with a positive marijuana test, no worries, she cleared her name and got her suspension lifted on March 14th. Claressa says, "I've never smoked weed, but hey, 3 nanograms, that's like a crumb from the snack table." Now onto some broccoli news. Jars Cannabis has found a hilarious loophole to run ads on TV. They aired a cheeky 30-second spot featuring broccoli. Turns out you can wiggle around the rules as long as you don't actually mention weed. Talk about a clever crop. In other news, Michigan Weedsters is hosting a lobby day. A new bill is making waves that could allow cops to use saliva swabs to test for THC and other substances. While it's already legal in 24 states, critics argue that tech isn't really reliable enough to determine if someone's too high to drive. We all know we don't want any unnecessary police interference with our grain. And listen up, there's some important legislation that could impact medical marijuana patients and recreational users, with proposals like a 32% wholesale tax and a statewide license moratorium. We could stray from the voter-approved principles of the MRTMA. Plus, roadside testing has serious flaws and could unfairly penalize medical users under the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act who still have THC in their system after use. I will keep you guys informed, but let's come together to advocate for fair cannabis regulations that respect the rights of patients and residents. Mark your calendars for this Tuesday, May 20th at 9 a.m. at the Anderson Building in Lansing. Your voice matters. Let's ensure our rights are upheld and keep Michigan a leader in compassionate cannabis regulation. Let's make these bills and proposals go up in smoke. That's it for this week. I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and this is Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the most controversial developments during the onslaught of cannabis adult use markets is what to do about drivers who get behind the wheel while under the influence of cannabis. Since this plant medicine impacts humans differently based on their metabolism and endocannabinoid system, some are able to tolerate a larger dose of the product than others. On top of that, THC stays in your system for 30 days, so a blood test isn't really fair. The other thing that's not really fair is when law enforcement officers profile drivers for operating under the influence when they detect the potent smell of cannabis. In New York this week, Governor Kathy Hochul wanted smelling the product to be a reason to stop drivers. She even added it into their budget only to see their legislature wipe that amendment off the books this week. Many states are still trying to figure out ways to gauge impairment versus use, especially with individuals having different tolerance for the plant medicine. Now let's check in with our new Massachusetts correspondent, Curtis Emery, with the Bay State Cannabis Report.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Massachusetts with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The CCC continues to change. This week we bid farewell to Commissioner Nuris Camargo, who announced on May 12th she'll be stepping down from her position. Elected in 2020, Camargo's seat was set to expire this September. Camargo's seat will be filled temporarily for the next 4 months until they can vote on a permanent replacement. Camargo will be missed. She's best known for helping move mass regulation forward with social justice at its core. Mass regulators have launched a new online tool to help those interested in employment in the industry find just that. It's called Equity Works Career Hub, and it aims to help the industry share jobs with the public and the public find access to employment and training within the cannabis industry. Social justice is at its heart. In fact, when it launches on June 19th, it will only be open to those in the CCC's equity program. This is aimed to help those most disenfranchised by the prohibition on marijuana find their foot in the door of Massachusetts' thriving $8 billion industry. We can thank the CCC's Equity Program and Community Outreach Department for this wonderful tool. It'll be great to see how this helps not only broaden the industry, but make the industry more inclusive to those on the outskirts of mass cannabis. I have been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the most respected employment recruiters in the cannabis space is Vanxt. This week, they teamed up with Bo Whitney from Whitney Economics to release their jobs report for 2024. And despite a total of just over $30 billion in revenue, there was a decline in jobs. Here are some of the highlights of this dual economic report. That $30.1 billion total in revenue is a 4% increase year over year, while the total number of available jobs decreased by 3% from 2023. New York, Mississippi, and Ohio showed the most growth, but the biggest decline came in mature markets like Colorado, Illinois, and Arizona. Bo Whitney is still bullish on the industry and expects revenues to grow by 13% this year to reach a total of $34 billion. Not much change in the public markets when they heard this news, but Curaleaf's European Union approval for an inhalation device might have given them a little bit of a boost at the stock market. Let's hear from our guy who's high on Wall Street, Doug Miller, on just what kind of a week was it for the publicly traded stocks. Here's Doug.
I'm Doug Miller from High On Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Tilt Holdings takes bold steps toward becoming a lean, mean vaporization machine. In Q1 2025, Tilt posted $22.7 million in revenue, down from its $37.5 million year over year, mainly due to its changes in its Jupiter hardware business. Cash flow operations flipped positive to $1.9 million, up from a loss last year. CEO Tim Conder says Tilt is going Jupiter first, offloading retail dispensaries in Massachusetts and focusing on scalable asset-light operations. Jupiter's making moves, earning EU medical device certification for its QMID vaporizer and expanding globally with Curaleaf. So let's see how the stock chart looks. It's trading around 0.004 cents and it's pulling back, so watch for dips because then it'll set up and get ready to run. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Well, that'll do it for the B block or second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, but don't go away. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed a bill banning many hemp products in that state that continues to shoot itself in the foot since it's been 4 years since voters passed a medical bill and they have yet to open up one dispensary. I don't even think they've given out a license. Anyway, I got to talk with a new Alabama correspondent. She's also a cannabis advocate and a radio show host in Alabama. Her name's Jennifer Boozer, and I'll introduce you to her after this.
Alabama has, and unfortunately, after 7 years of good business, we just had a bill pass, HB 445, that will now knock out 90% of our products and set up regulations that are so much stricter than any other industry, including alcohol, that none of us will be able to stay in business if this loss.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discover that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. It's a medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.